Hi there, and thanks for joining us for this Tribal Vault education video on the checklist templates in the AmFarm library. This is part 3 of our series on the checklist templates. In parts 1 and 2 of the series, we showed you how the templates work and the different types of checklist templates available in your Tribal Vault. In this segment, we'll show you how to build your own checklist from the templates and use them in your company. For our example today, we'll start an onboarding checklist for a new employee. We'll start with the empty shell for the standard checklist template. Checklist templates of all types are found in the templates view. Here, the templates are listed by object class. The template we need is in the checklist class. And here are the templates that are in this checklist class. Creating a new checklist is easy. Just select the all-in library template for the checklist you need, such as this checklist shell we'll be working with today. Then right-click and select New from this template. And this will create a copy of the checklist document. And here's the metadata card for our new onboarding checklist. We need to complete a few fields before we begin work within the checklist document itself. First, since this is going to be a template, we need to add the isTemplate property. Scroll down to the bottom of the metadata card. Using the Add Property button, search for the isTemplate property and check the little box. Next, we'll need a name for the checklist. I'm going to put that in the document name property, and we're just going to simply call this the new employee onboarding checklist. Because this is a template, we also need to define the document title. Since the document title for an actual new employee checklist will be calculated from heading fields that may be blank at this point, such as the company or contact, mFiles allows you to create a temporary title for a template. This temporary title is replaced when you create a new checklist from the template. Typically, the temporary title will include template so that it stands out in a search results list. We're going to use this title. If appropriate, you can add an ID for the checklist in the document ID property. We can set the document status as well. In this process document status property, you can see there's a raft of choices that show the whole life cycle for a document. For now, we're going to call this one a draft. Now let's look at some of the description fields. We should fill these out so that the checklist user understands what the checklist is about. The first field to look at is the task or activity field. Use this field to describe the scope or purpose for the checklist. You can overwrite the temporary text we have here. And so in the case of our onboarding checklist, the task to be completed is to introduce that new employee to the company, set them up in back office systems, and give them the tools and training they need. The entry conditions field is to identify the starting point or triggers for initiating checklist. So in our onboarding case, the new employee accepts a job offer as a reasonable starting point. The exit conditions field defines the situation or status when the checklist is complete. In our case, for our simplified version of an employee onboarding checklist, the employee needs to be set up for payroll and HR and have their assigned desk and computer, and have their initial onboarding training complete. A little further down the metadata card is a notes field, and typically in this notes field, you'll find comments and insights into how the document properties on this metadata card are incorporated into the checklist document. For example, the company field in the Excel checklist document is populated from the company property on the metadata card. To finish the creation of the checklist, we'll simply click Create. For now, we're going to check in the document so you can see where it shows up within the templates view. And here it is. So this is a template that's been added to the templates list in the checklist class. So now we're ready to add tasks to our checklist. Once it's selected, right-click and click Open. Check it out as well. So here's the empty checklist shell. I always start by enabling the shortcut keys. I find it a lot faster to use the shortcut keys than go up to the macro buttons each time. Select OK to enable that functionality. Let's look at the headings first here. You can see that some of these properties have been filled in from metadata properties and some have not. Company, for example, still has a placeholder here. That's set up within the Excel template to display that placeholder if the company property is blank within the metadata card. Originally, this field on the checklist template pulls in the checklist ID. It might be more useful to include the new employee's name here. So we're going to replace this field with the contact using the mFiles plugin. Click on the Insert Property button here. We can go down and find the contact property from the metadata card for this object and insert it. You can see the property tag ID up here in the formula bar, but the field itself is blank because that property within the metadata card is still blank. Now let's add content to the checklist. For complex checklists, it's a good idea to start with a little organization. So we're going to start with some headings to identify the sections we need to complete in the checklist. So maybe the first thing we need to do is some initial paperwork. You can just paste over top the placeholder labels that are here. And maybe we take our new employees on a tour on day one. I've got two more headings that I need to add. Go ahead and add them. The insert heading capability is only available through the buttons, not through the shortcut keys. And so maybe the third heading we need is to get the equipment for the new employee. And perhaps the final heading we're going to work on, coordinate training for the new employee. Now we need to begin filling out the checklist tasks. And let's start with our first section here. I'm just going to go ahead and fill these out. I've got an extra row here, so we'll just delete that. To delete the row, I could also simply use the keyboard shortcuts Control-Shift-Delete. Let's now work on the task for the day one tour. And once more, I've got an extra row here, but we're going to need that as we begin to talk about equipment. So I'm going to just move that down into the next section. I'll use shortcut keys this time, Control-Shift-Down arrow. I need another task for this area, so I'm going to use Control-Shift-Insert. The new employee either gets a laptop if they're going to be a field technician, or a desktop if they're going to be a NOC engineer. So we need to add those two tasks, and then we need to add the conditionals that go along with. So again, the employee only gets a laptop if they're a field tech. Add the conditional by Control-Shift greater than. It brings up this little window. And in this case, I'm only going to complete this task if it's a field technician. And likewise, if it's an engineer, then we're going to order them a desktop. So for this equipment section, we're only going to do one task or another based on the conditional specifications. And so the final area we need to complete on our draft checklist here for onboarding is to add a couple tasks in the training section. I'll need to insert a couple blank rows, and I'm just going to use the shortcut keys for that. So Control-Shift-Insert, Control-Shift-Insert again gets me two tasks to work with. And now I've completed some initial tasks for our onboarding checklist. Now we're ready to close our checklist. Next, we're going to show you how to use it. So we'll save it and close the file, check it in. Here's our draft checklist. You can see the results under preview, and you can see the checklist with those initial tasks filled in. One more thing, since we're now ready to use our checklist, we can change the status to live to let team members know that this is the checklist to use for onboarding. Save that change. To actually create a new onboarding checklist for an employee, we'll right-click on the checklist template and select New from this template. This time we're going to fill in some more fields. We need to identify the company, and it's going to be our internal IT company, Knight Infotech. We're going to be onboarding John Watson. In the status area, the manager who's onboarding John is going to be Alex Cross. And we'll set the status for in progress right now. And when the checklist is completed, we'll set that status to complete, and we'll fill in the completed date. Make sure that Open for Editing is checked. And then we'll click Create to open the onboarding checklist that we just built. And here is that onboarding checklist again. In this case, though, it's a copy of the template specifically for onboarding John Watson. Notice how the heading fields have been filled in now. Instead of the placeholder company, it says Knight Infotech. We've got John's name up here. Now we can use the checklist to track John's onboarding status. Let's work on a couple tasks. Perhaps he showed up and we were able to collect his signed employment agreement. But there's an issue with his employment eligibility. Apparently he only brought one form of ID. So we have to make a note there. So we're not going to be able to go any further, at least in this paperwork stage, until he brings his second form of ID and we can have the complete form and the ID that we're going to submit. That means that forwarding the paperwork to HR is on hold until we get his employee eligibility form correct. Let's say we're done for now. We'll save and check in this checklist document. And if we go back to the home screen, look at our recently accessed list. You can see here is the checklist that we created for onboarding John. And if we look at the metadata card, we can see that the checklist title has been created to include the company name and the individual that we're onboarding. The next time we want to work on this checklist document, we can simply double-click on the object itself or right-click and open the document. For review, these are the steps we took to create a new checklist from one of the library templates. First thing we did was we selected the appropriate library checklist from the library. We get there via the templates view. Right-click on that object, the template object, and select New from this template. Once the metadata card comes up, we add the Is Template property and check it at the bottom of the metadata card. As a minimum, you need to create a document name and title for this new template. The title often has the word template in it. It's best to complete some of the other description fields as well. The task activity field tells you what you're trying to accomplish in a checklist. Entry conditions tell you the starting point. Exit conditions tell you where you need to be once the checklist is complete. When we've got those metadata card properties completed, then we make sure that Open for Editing is checked. Click Create on the bottom of the metadata card. The Excel checklist document will open. You add your task as appropriate. And when done, save the Excel file and check in the template. And now you have a completed checklist template that your team can use to make sure you perform a procedure the same way every time. Before we close our video, let's talk for a minute about some best practices for your checklist. The first thing to note is that it's very unlikely that you're going to get it completely right on the first pass. The goal is to get it roughly right and publish it. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the very good. Before you start working on your checklist template, take some time to organize your thoughts. Define the activity, the purpose and objectives for what the checklist is all about, the entry and exit conditions, and then identify the major topics in their general order. And these are going to be the headings in your checklist. Use your subject matter experts to initiate new checklist templates. They know the most about the procedures. Once you have a draft checklist, use it in at least 2 pilot cases to identify items that you may have missed in the draft. After updating the template with the pilot results, notify your team and train them on the checklist. Even with the pilots, your initial checklist templates could be missing steps or be incomplete in some other way, and procedures change over time. On an ongoing basis, collect feedback from checklist users on changes they identify and roll them back into the checklist template, and notify the team that you've now published updates to the checklist. Make sure that you adopt these lessons learned in a timely manner. There's a good chance that changes to the checklist avoid a mistake or a service failure at some point in the future. This concludes part 3 of our tutorial on checklist templates in Tribal Vault. In this segment, we discussed how to build your own checklist templates and the templates available in the Tribal Vault library. So thanks for joining us for our series on using checklist templates in the Tribal Vault. Please check out our other educational videos on the Tribal Vault channel.